So really just to welcome everybody, thank you for spending the time and being part of our Lead Connect festival. Starting with Roy. So Roy, you're from UHL, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alice. Of course, I just share my presentation right from the word off. I'm one of the counsellors over at Amica, and this presentation put together by my colleagues Tracy and Veronica, so I'm just presenting it today. And we put this together because these are extraordinary times, even still. And over at Amica, we wanted to offer some tools to help us all think about how we can deal more resiliently with what life may put our way. Now, you might know some or even most of what I'm going to talk about, but you may not have put it all together into this resilience toolbox for yourself. And ordinarily, we share this presentation, well, it's actually a workshop over a few hours, so there would be time to reflect. But today we'll go through the slides, pausing from time to time and to consider a few things. Don't worry if you miss anything. You can find this presentation on the LLR website later on, but also there's a version on the Amica website at the moment. But from time to time, I'm going to ask you to pause and do a bit of work for yourself. So if you do have a moment or two, grab a pen and a piece of paper. And if you don't have the time, just don't worry, we can do it in our heads. So a definition of resilience. There's many, and we like the way this one encompasses the whole experience, mind, body and spirit, and describes the positive change. So it's the capacity to remain flexible in our thoughts, feelings and behaviours when faced by life disruptions or extended periods of pressure, so that we emerge from our difficulty stronger, wiser and more able, and that is the flexibility where we get the bounce back idea of resilience. Talking about bounce back can imply that you're not changed by the experience, whereas it's important to acknowledge that problems, trauma, stressful situations do change us. So we'll be looking at how to be more like the above definition. But first, let's look at why we might need to be resilient in the first place. So, excuse me. So this slide is indicative of our lives. For most of us at the moment, we're all being asked to do more with less, and this is the case at home as well as at work. When we have to keep on going for extended periods of time, our ability to rise to the challenges gets stretched to the limit. And when we've been doing this for a long time, our thinking becomes rigid and inflexible. And because we don't think as well as we focus in on the details and try to focus harder. And in doing so, we lose the bigger picture. And we might therefore develop some low self-confidence. And if you've been asked to do more for less over a long period of time, there can come a point when you begin to believe that it's because you're not good enough and it's you that is the problem. So you might start withdrawing from colleagues, friends, family because we're so focused in, which can be exhausting. So we might feel that something has to go, and we tend to drop the very things that are easy to drop, like people around us who care about us and might offer us support. We'll probably experience low motivation and low commitment to work, and this is a natural reaction to all of the above. Presenteeism, and that's an unusual phrase. That is turning up to work when we're not really able to function properly, feeling like it's better to be there than letting the side down. But if you can't function, is it really helpful to be there? Sickness absences, and when it overwhelms you and you know that you've reached the absolute limit, the point where you cannot function reliably anymore, or you have physical symptoms that cause you to feel unwell from working so hard to keep hold of everything. So how else could we describe all of that? Yes, stress. We use this word a lot, and I think it's helpful to sometimes remember that This one word describes a lot of thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. So now I'm going to ask you to think about who and what triggers your stress. So let's pause and think about it for a few moments. Perhaps write them down, but don't share in the chat window because what you're going to say is going to be recorded. Try and be specific rather than management at work. Have a think about things that stress you out about the management. Also think about home and social life and what are the stresses in those arenas too. If your kids stress you out, what is it that they say or do that stresses you out? So we'll pause a few moments. Remember to be honest with yourself. This is for no one else's benefit but yours. And we'll carry on when you've had time to think about or write down one or two things that are major stresses in your life. So we'll move on to the different types of stress. And acute stress is the first one. And this is the type of stress that we all really need from time to time. It's the stress reaction that helps when we're in trouble. It's what helped us run away from saber-toothed tigers in our distant past and now helps us run out of burning buildings, for instance. It's an alarm reaction leading to a massive release of adrenaline, and recovery follows quickly. It could save your life. And then there's chronic stress, and this is the constant repeat of stress with little or no opportunity for recovery, and it can even impair our immune response. And when our capacity to cope with stress is stretched to the limit, this leads to distress. So we've all felt varying degrees of distress, and we feel some very distinct symptoms of it in our head, the psychological symptoms, our hearts, behavioural or emotional symptoms, and our bodies, physical symptoms. So I want you to imagine or draw 3 columns on a sheet of paper, labelled head, psychological, heart, behavioural, or emotional, and body, physical. And take a few moments to think or write down a few symptoms of stress in each of these columns. And we'll continue in just a little while. And if you want to share any of these in the chat, please do. Okay, so you've probably got a list in front of you or in your mind that contains a range of symptoms like these. You probably even have some that aren't on here because this is not exhaustive by any means. It's safe to say that there are lots of symptoms when you're living with distress. So for instance, let's have a look at the psychological, things like low mood, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorders, and even in extreme circumstances, psychosis can be triggered by stress. Over in the behavioural side of things, we might struggle with physical care, find ourselves crying and withdrawing, may feel a sense of mania, irritability, anger, or we might over or undereat, or we might increase our intake of alcohol or smoking or even drugs. And the physical symptoms, some things we might have experienced are things like trembling and sweating, nausea, dizziness, headaches, problems with digestion and sleep, chest pains and palpitation, problems with libido and on our skin, things like eczema, for instance. Again, these are not exhaustive. I'm sure you will have your own list, which includes things I've not thought of. So we know from functional MRI scans that there are some very real things that are happening in our brains when we're living in distress. Thinking power is disrupted. You can't problem solve in the same way because the blood flow is not flowing to the bits of our brain that makes us human. So as humans, we have a part of our brain that makes us a little bit different from the rest of the animal kingdom. And as humans, we can use cold, hard reasoning, but when we're in distress, that ability is hijacked by our amygdala, which deals with our emotions. And this means it's like losing 10 to 15 IQ points. And we are thinking, but less well, and with less capacity. And this is known as an amygdala hijack, a phrase coined by Daniel Goleman in his book, and there's a reference slide at the end of this presentation for all of the books and resources used to put together this training. We're now going to look at ways to help ourselves avoid this amygdala hijack in a moment or two, though. But let's look at a few quick tips for helping you come out to the other side of the hijack more quickly. And then we'll start to look at ways that we can train ourselves to better avoid them in the first place. So if we get hijacked, we can try to eliminate the noise, turn away or move away from what's causing the stress, however briefly, to give yourself the chance to notice feeling coming, acknowledge those feelings, and it will help you deal with them and let them pass more quickly. Again, this has been proven using functional MRI scan. However, we often find it is harder than we should to distinguish thoughts and feelings. The feeling might be anger. I felt angry because I've been sidelined. And that's different from the idea that we might say we've been sidelined. So you can see that as, we might have that original thought and describe it as a feeling, but actually the feeling was that anger. Again, it might take a little bit of practice, but it pays to invest some time in being able to acknowledge the feelings when they're so powerful that you're experiencing a hijack. Breathe. Shallow breathing triggers the hijack, so breathe in for a count of 5 and out for a count of 5, and really slow the breathing. It helps bring your brain power back. Move around. Aim for a bit of physical activity every 90 minutes at least to keep your circulation flowing and cortisol, which is a stress hormone levels, in balance. So let's recap what we've talked about so far before we move on to the prescription for being more resilient. It's not all in the mind. There are some real physical things happening in the brain and body. Stress affects everybody in differing amounts and in different ways. Stress is a contributing factor to many other illnesses, so recognizing signs and symptoms is important. Also, we cannot stop stress happening, but we can minimize the effects. We can change. So now I want to come on to talking about the research undertaken by Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney on resilience. Psychiatrists and neurobiologists, they were interested in why some people cope so much better with life's challenges than others when they had previously focused on looking at depression and anxiety and the causes and treatments of these. So they flipped things around and they began to study the other side of things, which was resilience, and why some people are more resilient in situations than others. This was a study that was conducted over 15 years, where they interviewed people who had faced adversity and had come out the other side to have fulfilling and successful lives. Many had been the subjects of war. Some have been prisoners in prison of war in Vietnam, who'd been held in solitary confinement and tortured for many years. Some subjects had lost limbs to landmines, and others had been born with conditions that some might have found life-limiting, but these people had thrived. So from all of this research, they were able to come up with a prescription for resilience. And they acknowledged that some of the traits in the candidates will be genetic, but many are not. And therefore, we can, with work, train ourselves to be more resilient to life's challenges. And the following slide is the prescription for resilience. But after going through it, we'll look into what it means for us and move it from the research to the real world. So we can all see that small changes will help, and that we can think about how we might look at making bigger changes. But this isn't about changing your life. It's more about changing the way you think and feel in your life, and that takes work. But we can all have some quick wins, which we'll look at later. So here it is, the resilience prescription. Like anything though, this will take work. So positive attitude. Yep, genetics do have a part to play with this. Some people are naturally predisposed to look on the positive side, but we can train ourselves to be more positive. This realistic optimism, though, acknowledges that you have challenges ahead, but you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Meditation and mindfulness can help with this, and also simple exercises such as writing down each day the things that have made you feel positive and the things that have made you feel negative. It might be easier to see the negatives initially. Our brains have a habit of doing that, but with practice you'll be able to get used to not missing the positives when they happen, or just being more positive about having negative thoughts, because after all, that's all they are, just thoughts. Cognitive flexibility through cognitive reappraisal, or this is just simply a long way of describing the idea of what doesn't kill you and makes you stronger. Look at challenging situations, past or present, and find the positives in them. Look to change what was horrific into something that can help you. And we've all heard uplifting stories of people who have gone through long cancer treatments and have come out the other side having made great friendships with fellow sufferers, and have written blogs or books to help others. And this leads nicely to number 3 on the list. Embrace a personal moral compass. So many of the participants in the study held some belief or faith in something higher than themselves. And this was often a traditional religious belief, but not always. The man who lost his leg from a landmine started a charity that was supported by Lady Diana to rid much of the world of landmines. So having an altruistic purpose, something bigger than just us, is really, really useful for resilience. Find positive and resilient role models, I should say, resilient role models in your own life. Things like colleagues, members of your own family, maybe inspirational figures that have gone through similar things to you. And in the study, the prisoners of war used each other as role models. Some were offered early release, but they chose to stick together and only go if they could all go. Face your fears. It's normal to be scared and to have fears. Courage is not a lack of fear, it's dealing with it. Having the fear, carrying it with you, but facing the challenge. There are big benefits from facing your fears: self-esteem and self-confidence. And it can also desensitize you from feeling as much fear in the future, like a stress inoculation. Develop active coping skills. Resilient people use active rather than passive coping skills. They minimize the appraisal of threat, create positive statements about themselves, and actively seek support from others. And that brings us to establishing and nurturing a supportive social network. Very few of us can do it alone. Emotional strength comes from close relationships, connecting with people, and that creates a safe haven for us. Even the prisoners of war in solitary confinement had that. They created a tap code, and this became hugely important to all of them. It gave them connection and emotional strength, and we all need a tap code. Physical exercise and well-being. And we know from lots of studies the positive benefits of physical exercise on our physical health, and even more importantly in these circumstances that we face at the moment, on our mental health, well-being, and on our brain function. Train regularly in multiple areas of this prescription. Change requires systematic activity. So concentrate on emotional intelligence. That is, understanding your own emotions when you feel them, so that your brain can acknowledge them, reframe it, and reason it. Use meditation to understand your mind better and be less concerned by the thoughts and feelings that pass through there. Think about your moral integrity, altruism, and how working for others works for you. In your life, what is your higher purpose? So in your life, what is your higher purpose? And also consider your physical fitness and well-being. And 10, recognize and use and look after your signature strengths. We are all different. Learn to recognize your character strengths and engage them to deal with difficult and stressful situations. So there we have the long version of the resilience prescription. And I encourage you to watch this video that I'm about to pop up by Lucy Hone, which looks at a shorter version of this. It's maybe a little bit more accessible to everyday life, and it contains much of the previously mentioned prescription, but on a very human, personal level. And it's much less research in nature. So bear with me whilst I just cue that up. So I'm going to stop presenting now because I realise I haven't queued it up right. So bear with me one moment. So this should work now. So quite a powerful presentation there by Lucy. I'll just come back to my presentation now. So I do apologise, I'm showing the wrong screen now. So now we know the prescription, it's time to begin to think about how resilient you are. Do you keep a positive attitude during difficult situations? Do you get that problems, hurdles, suffering are all part of everybody's lives? Can you focus on the positive? Even in negative situations, see the light at the end of the tunnel, beyond the hurdles and challenges. Do you focus? Do you choose where you focus and choose to focus on the positive? Do you have skills to help stay calm and rested? Do you have a network of people that offers you support? This is really important. Is what you're doing helping or harming you? Do you keep a good eye on yourself? Do you take good care of yourself? And do you keep an eye on the big picture, even in challenging situations? None of this is easy, by the way, and none of it removes the pain. Now, it's time to look back at what you thought about or wrote down earlier as your stress triggers and think about ways you might change one or two of them. It might be about changing your attitude to something. It might be about asking for some support. But looking at the tools we've been looking at, have a think for a moment about what and how you might change things. And I want to show an example of that. This is from one of my colleagues over at Amica. And when she was a young, full-time working mum of 3 little boys, she used to come home from work and have to battle to feed and then bathe all of the boys and then get them to bed. They wanted to play and stay up with mum. They hadn't seen her all day. But she was frazzled, shouting at them and feeling on edge, almost at her breaking point. One night she just couldn't stand it any longer and rang her dad to come over and sort the kids out because she just couldn't do it anymore. Her dad came around, bathed the kids, read them a story and put them to bed. and he sat with his daughter afterwards and asked, "Do you do this every night?" "What?" she replied. "Bathe the kids," he said. She said, "Of course I do." And he said, "Why?" "When you were little, you got a bath once a week and a wipe with a flannel on weeknights. You're running yourself ragged, doing something you think you should be doing. Was it right for them or for you?" And from then on, she came home, fed the kids, and played with them for an hour before reading them a story and putting them to bed, after a quick wash with a flannel at the sink. And they were all much happier and less stressed. Now, admittedly, that's a tricky tale to tell in these unusual times, because of course we should all be making sure our kids' hands and faces are properly washed, as our own. But I'm sure you understand the point I'm making. And sometimes we just need to think about why we're doing something and how it makes us feel to decide we might need to approach things differently. So again, let's just take a moment to think about how you can change things from your stress list. So I hope you feel that you might be able to change a couple of things to make life less stressful. And if you can't change them now, maybe you can see ways that you can change them in the future with a bit of work. So here are some of the ways you might approach changing things in your life that fit alongside the prescription, but they're not rocket science, they're just ways of feeling and behaving that will help you build resilience. So develop hobbies and interests, make time for friends and family, practice acknowledging your emotions, that's the emotional intelligence we mentioned, learn to say no, connect socially with others on a regular basis, that's your tap code. Fitness, physical and emotional, keeping physically fit, but not forgetting things like mindfulness and meditation. Realistic optimism. Start working on turning your negative automatic thoughts to positive automatic thoughts. And there's plenty of resources around cognitive behavioral therapy that might help with this. In fact, on the Amica website, check out Silver Cloud. That's a really good, useful resource to help you build that skill. It's free and available now. And face fears and challenges. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Now, I'd like to move on to our closing exercise. I've hopefully given you some things to contemplate about stress in your life. And now we're going to finish with a meditation. So sit comfortably in a chair with your legs uncrossed and your feet on the ground, hands resting easily on your knees or in your lap. Take a long, deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And feel as you breathe out your weight in the chair. Take another deep breath slowly, breathing in through your nose and out through the mouth. And as you breathe out, close your eyes, then breathe naturally. Now I want you to think about 5 things you've seen today. And 4 things you've heard today. Three things you've touched today. Two things you've smelled today. And 1 thing you've tasted today. Now take 2 deep breaths. And when you're ready, open your eyes. So thank you for watching this session. This final slide gives references to the books we used to put this training together. And the Amica website has lots of helpful resources and information on it too. There's some of these breathing exercises for mindfulness, for instance, and a longer version of our mindfulness course. And I hope you feel that you have some positive tools now to help you deal better with the stresses in all of our busy lives. So thank you. I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Roy. That was a fantastic way to spend